Now we're going to look at what happens when white puts his queenside on d2 rather than on c3, which is a line which has been used from time to time. We can look at one of the classic games here between Najdorf and Miles. Miles is one of the founding fathers of this variation. Bishop g4. So castles, knight bd7, h3, bishop h5, and now bishop e2. And we should note here that because white hasn't committed his queen's knight yet, the move bishop b4 doesn't have any particular point. It could just be chased away with a3. So Miles has to put his bishop on d6. And we'll now, in the game, we'll look at knight bd2. A question arises, of course, as to what happens if white plays knight c3. And if this is just a move order trick which white can use to prevent us meeting knight c3 with bishop b4. And the answer is yes, it is a move order trick, but at the same time black actually gets full equality here anyway. And the reason is, after knight c3, if we castle, white plays directly in the center with e4, and black is fully organized to meet this with e5 with just equal chances. For instance, the game can continue, take on e5. Now if knight takes e5, the pieces are exchanged, which is good news for black. Knight d4 is an attempt to keep more tension in the position, but now black has bishop c5, which just seems very efficient, attacking the knight on d4. Knight b3, queen takes d1, bishop takes d1, bishop b6, and this endgame has been played in about 15 games, and white really doesn't have anything. You can look, for instance, at Portish Miles, a game from 1978. It's true that Miles lost that game, but he can't have any complaints about this particular position. So in this move order with bishop e2, where white delays putting his knight on c3, clearly we can't go for the bishop b4 stuff, but we can play bishop d6. So then the question arises, of course, as to why I'm not recommending bishop d6 against knight c3 generally. And the reason for that is when white hasn't committed his bishop to e2, as Sakayev and Semkov point out, e4 here is very strong, because after e5, white, or black rather, falls under an immediate attack with g4, and this is very dangerous. As compared to the other variation, the white bishop is more actively placed, and black is a full move behind. He hasn't castled yet, so opening the center is extremely dangerous for him. And this doesn't seem to be a line which I can really recommend. So that's why we're not going bishop d6 against knight c3 normally. But in this position, once bishop e2 is played, black has no better option than bishop d6. And here Najdorf played his knight to d2. Miles castled and knight c4. Now this is a plan which is used from time to time. It's quite involved to move this knight to c4, where it is admittedly well placed, but it spent 2 moves getting there. And the other knight can come to e5 sometimes. If black does nothing, then white might just complete development with b3, bishop b2. So a number of different options have been played for black at this point, but I quite like the plan used by Miles. It just looks quite straightforward to me, which basically just involves trying to exchange the knights, which white has spent so much time developing. So starting with knight b6, trying to get rid of this c4 knight. Najdorf played knight f to e5. The light square bishops are exchanged, and now knight f to d7. So black is just aiming to exchange another pair of minor pieces at least, after which he'll have very comfortable play. Najdorf took on d7. Queen takes d7 and b3. but now black is in time to take on c4 and play e5, and this position is already very comfortable for black. He's achieved one of his main freeing advances in the Queen's Gambit, generally speaking, of e5, and white can't really pretend for an advantage. And after bishop b2, of course white could also take here, but after this the black bishop is very well placed in the center. After bishop b2, it's possible to hold the tension in the center with a move like rook e8 perhaps, but Miles just went for this same plan which we saw in a number of other games, admittedly where black had knights, but just putting his pawn on e4. Now his bishop is unopposed, or rather unconstrained by any of his own pawns. The white bishop is constrained momentarily by its own pawns, and this pawn gives black a useful kind of stake in the center. White played d5 to liberate his own bishop, and now Miles played rook a8, and I just really like this plan. It's very simple, straightforward, direct, and it's quite active. Rook a d1 and now f5. So clearly if white doesn't do anything, Miles is going to break with f4, after which the white king side is going to be under attack. All of black's pieces are geared up to that purpose. So Najdorf played correctly, I think. f4. Miles took and played rook e4, rook d4, rook fe8, and again this position looks like something which you could get from a Nimzo Indian, where the question as to whether or not white is able to break with e4 has been answered decisively in the negative. Black has an excellent blockading position with pressure down the e-file, and it actually takes a little bit of skill from Najdorf to bring this position to safety. Rook takes e4. Miles took with the pawn. Possibly he could have taken with the rook as well, but taking with the pawn is completely sound. Queen e7. Now in the long run he can play with bishop e5 if required and neutralize the white bishop on b2. And okay, bishop a3 is a tactic which you wouldn't really expect Tony Miles to fall for. d6 check and d7, but it's unsurprising that black isn't really troubled by that development. And now after exchange on d6, rook f4, queen e5, a4, a6, both of these pawns are as weak as each other, and neither side can play anymore. So the game was agreed to draw. So this, as you can see, is a plan which Miles introduced 30 years ago, and it still, to me, seems to be entirely adequate to deal with white's plan. Just to look at a couple of other examples. Obviously, the play here is slightly slower, I think, than after knight c3, because black, or white rather, is spending an additional move with his knight. He's also not immediately gaining the two bishops. He's not immediately bringing this b pawn to c3 to get pressure down the b file and strengthen his center. So black's position is under less immediate threat here, and the variation as a whole is less critical. But just to look at a couple of examples of what can happen, white can play b3, and again black just plays for the break in the center, bishop b2 and now e5. And now a game between Donner and Matulovic from Weekend Z 1974 continued, takes on e5 and knight takes e5, and this is a position which actually Husman assesses as even slightly better for black, because he's broken very effectively in the center, and his pieces are going to be more active on the central files. Alternatively, after e5, white can play knight c4. But now again, just the classic plan of playing the pawn to e4. And once the knight comes to e5, taking on e2, I think again is a position which is very comfortable for black. He's managed to get his pawn not only to e5 but to e4, where it stakes out a kingside space advantage, a central space advantage indeed, and black is just very comfortable there. Look at one other example just here. If white starts with knight d2 directly, again, bishop b4 doesn't make as much sense, I think, when the knight is not on c3, so bishop d6 is indicated, and queen b3. This was played in a game between Muradiabi and Al-Safar in Halong City, 2009. And in this position, black played queen c8, which is okay, but I think the simplest solution is just to play the knight to b6, attacking this bishop, bishop e2, and castle. And black looks very comfortable to me. a4 can be met with a5, gaining control of this b4 square. And if white plays e4, then black has this resource of bishop f4, after which these pieces are going to get exchanged. And if anything, he'll have some slight pressure on the white center. So I think that this is just equal. So knight bd2 is an interesting plan of trying to bring the knight to c4, but the problem with it is, I think, that it just spends a lot of time putting the knight on a position where it can be exchanged. It's important, though, to know about this plan, because we can't use our bishop b4 stuff from before. So it's important to know that instead of bishop b4 and c5, in these lines we play bishop d6 and e5, and then, if allowed, e4, which I think is fully sufficient to equalize.